For and against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, hoping to sway public opinion and maybe to sway those key senators who still might be on the fence. The conservative Judicial Crisis Network is pouring more than $1 million into TV ads defending Kavanaugh's integrity and his character. Then you've got the left-leaning group Demand Justice releasing this new ad to run here in Washington. If you're in D.C., you might have just seen it, as well as in Alaska and Maine, home to Republican Senators Lisa Murkowski, of course, and Susan Collins. Check it out.
My name is Christine Blasey Ford. I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. The details about that night that bring me here today are the I will never forget. They have been seared into my memory and have haunted me episodically as an adult. My responsibility is to tell you the truth.
I'm joined now by the executive director of Demand Justice, Brian Fallon. Anna Palmer and Sahil Kapoor are back with us. So, Brian, in addition to Washington, Alaska, Maine, you guys made a 5-figure cable buy in San Francisco, I believe in the hopes that Dr. Ford and her family might see this. Why? Why is that important to you?
Well, that was the ultimate act of bravery for her to put herself out there. It never should have gotten to that point in our minds. Senators putting her through that and forcing women all across the country to relive trauma that they've experienced in their own lives. I think that was a wrenching moment for men and women across the country. And I think that the senators that are still on the fence emerged from that hearing thinking that if they just call for an FBI investigation and let the process run its course, that will give them the political space to potentially revert back to supporting Brett Kavanaugh. But I think that as these reports have surfaced, including by NBC over the weekend, suggesting that the White House is putting arbitrary constraints on the investigation, it's going to make it much harder for Susan Collins and Jeff Flake at the end of this week to say that there's been a fair process here. And I think people have to default back to supporting and believing Dr. Blasey Ford.
Senator Flake we aired it on the show earlier. He had this moment on the 60 Minutes interview where he talked about being in that elevator and those protests came up to him. He had already at that point said he was a yes vote on Kavanaugh. Then that elevator moment happened, and then we saw what occurred in the hearing afterward, that meeting from the Judiciary Committee. Is that a sign to you that there is still a possibility to sway senators, even if they've come out one direction or the other?
I think so. And I think that the other thing that is emerging is a big storyline here that could potentially be dispositive and go against Brett Kavanaugh here is people seem to have formed a pretty firm judgment that he doesn't tell the truth. That was true in the first hearing that he did about issues like he lied about whether he was involved in certain judicial selections during the Bush administration. It seems like he lied about getting stolen materials in 2006. But then last week at that hearing...
Although Kavanaugh's supporters will say, well, that he did not tell the truth. I think you're also referring to things that came up in this more recent hearing of things like things in the yearbook, et cetera, which Republicans say, gosh, that's just petty, small
But you
stuff.
know what? Jim Comey, of all people, I don't agree with Jim Comey on much, but he did have an op-ed in the New York Times this past weekend that said that the small lies actually matter. If you're an investigator and you're looking into somebody's credibility and you're trying to make an assessment about whether they're telling the truth, and it's actually a jury instruction that if you conclude that somebody is misleading, even on a minor detail, you have the right to exclude all of their testimony as potentially untruthful. So actually, I think lying about the petty things like what, some of those yearbook references mean will actually help senators form a judgment that why can we trust them on the big things.
Let me step back for a second, because I think what you're talking about in the course of the reporting that we've done over the last week seems to also be mobilizing not just Democratic-leaning voters, but Republicans as well, who look at some of that line of argument and go, man, this is firing me up too. So, for example, the Judicial Crisis Network is out with, we talked about that series of ads, sort of up against yours. I want to play a small piece of it here.
The accusations against Brett Kavanaugh are a smear, and the women who know him best dispute them.
The girls who were his closest friends in high school had no choice but to stand up and say, that's not the Brett I know.
Brett Kavanaugh is a good man who is incapable of mistreating anyone.
Conservatives are fired up about this, and you are seeing this in new polling showing the Republican Party is actually closing the enthusiasm gap a bit. Democrats hold a 4-point advantage, but that's down from 17 points back in April. Do you worry this could backfire?
So I think two things are true. Number one, it is true that the Thursday hearing did cause a little bit of a consolidation among the Republican base. Going into the hearing, you saw Brett Kavanaugh's numbers being pretty milquetoast, and about a third of the public, including about a third of Republicans, didn't have a one way or the other about whether he should be confirmed or not. Post the hearing, you are seeing Republicans rally around him. It's more of a shirts versus skins, us against them mentality. Trump's voice of support for him also contributed to that. However, the other thing that's happening is independents are turned off by this whole thing. And we did a poll, we did dial tests. Jeff Guerin, Democratic pollster, did some dial tests for us last Thursday during the hearing.
Okay.
Among people that did not have an opinion on Kavanaugh's confirmation going into the hearing, coming out of it, they broke 60-40 against his confirmation. So the people that I think are ultimately going to be the deciding factions in these electorates, they're, I think, going to have a bad taste in their mouth if Republicans push through with this nomination at the end of this week.
Let me ask the two reporters sitting next to you if they buy that argument. Do you think that holds water come November?
I mean, I think if you look at, if past is precedent, Republicans are very focused on the Supreme Court. This is something that is a base issue, and if Brett Kavanaugh is not confirmed, they will go crazy.
It depends on which chamber. So in the House, the gender gap is extremely significant right now. It could be the largest ever. It could be historic. In 2006, Democrats won House races by 12 points. Now the polls say they're up by 13 points, 16 points. One poll by Pew said they're up by 23 points among women. That's very significant in these suburban swing districts that are going to decide control. But if Republicans are really riled up, it could help them in the Senate because the battleground is very red, it's very rural, it's very Republican.
Brian, very quickly before I let you go, on the FBI investigation here, some Democrats now say a week is not enough time. Are they moving the goalposts, do you believe?
I don't think that the time constraint is the necessary issue. I think the issue is the comprehensiveness of the investigation. If they meet with everybody and we don't hear from more accusers and witnesses that say they haven't even gotten so much as a phone call, then that's the issue as opposed to whether it's a week or 2 weeks.
Brian Fallon, thanks for coming on.